Now, on to our fireside chat with these remarkable honorees. Ladies and gentlemen, we learned this afternoon that our moderator, Martha Raddatz, Chief Global Affairs Correspondent for ABC News, was called away on assignment and is currently on the ground in Iowa. In a stroke of quite good fortune, we have with us tonight Mr. Michael Leiter, Senior National Security, Cybersecurity, and Counterterrorism Analyst for NBC News, who has graciously agreed to act as Martha's very capable substitute. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike, a dear friend of ours, was director of the National Counterterrorism Center for 4 years during the administrations of both President Bush 43 and President Obama, and earlier, importantly, helped establish the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Now a partner in the national security practice of Skadden Arps, he is also the chairman of the BENS Advisory Council. Please join me in welcoming Mike Leiter, our moderator this evening.
Congratulations. Well, good evening. Thank you, Nordy. I'm Martha Raddatz. They say the television camera adds 10 pounds, but it does a lot of different things. And I do appreciate that this is a little bit like you just spent a couple of $1,000s for Hamilton tickets. And there's Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you open up your playbill. It says the understudy for this evening is Weird Al Yankovic. The good thing is you're not here to hear me talk. You're here to hear from these two American patriots and heroes speak. And as Nordy said, and as was made very clear in the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy in January, there are many complexities in today's national security environment, but one constant is technological change. And one necessity within to counter that change is an innovation. And I don't think there's any doubt that these two men and the organizations they lead represent two sides of the coin which will make that innovation and make America successful into the future possible. It's that partnership between the private sector and the public sector. And again, congratulations to both of you. I'll start with softballs in the spirit of Martha. So as we look at this world, you both face tremendous strategic challenges. Some are related, some are probably independent, but let's start, if I could, with you, General. You look at the world today, what are the strategic challenges, I hate the phrase, but that either keep you up at night or when you're hiking the Appalachian Trail with your lovely wife, are still maybe in the back of your mind?
So Mike, a great question. So I'm going to stall for a second and say April's an auspicious month. It was the month that the internet was invented, so they say. It's also the month of Susie Schwartz and Paige Robbins' birthday, so let's wish them both a happy birthday. I'm actually quite fond of saying nothing keeps me awake at night. I do sleep quite soundly. That's because there are 2 million men and women who wear this uniform that represent us every single night. It shouldn't be lost on any of you. They're the important ones. Somewhere in Afghanistan this evening, there's a young soldier who's assisting an Afghan troop and teaching them how to be more professional. Somewhere in Syria tonight, there's a young man or woman operating a sensor system that's trying to find the next ISIS cell that might threaten us. And so, based on the professionalism of those young men and women, there's very little that I worry about. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about the accelerating pace of technology and what it means about our current strategic advantage. And as was said earlier by General Schwartz, it's no longer measured in weeks, months, years, or decades. That advantage could be measured in minutes or hours. And so our ability to scale new technologies and bring them to the field quickly and put them in the hands of those young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines is what I try to spend my time on. And it is what worries me the most, that we'll be able to learn from our commercial colleagues who have succeeded in innovation at scale and bring that into an institution as large as our US military and put it to effect on finding, fixing, and finishing an enemy that actually threatens all of us, whether that's Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, or the vast network of violent extremists that exist in the world. And so scale is what worries me the most.
Great. But Chuck, you live in the same world, but you've got a different mission, even if that mission's related. That same pace of technological change, part of which you're driving, how do you look out and what are your strategic challenges in the face of that same rapid evolution of technology?
Well, you know, first of all, I want to just say it's humbling to hear you talk about our innovation and act as though you guys don't innovate and or we innovate more rapidly, because I think it's, for all of us in this room, we owe all of you a great deal of gratitude for what you do every day, and those 2 million people out there and all of you who have come before them. So thank you. And I think it's that humility that should inspire the entire business community to actually want to engage. Because to me, you all are some of the greatest leaders in the world. And for us to have an opportunity to sit here and be by your side and help you achieve your mission, which frankly should be all of our missions, is a real honor. So thank you for that. You know, we live in a world, particularly in Silicon Valley, where we know one thing for sure, that there is a group of most likely young people sitting somewhere in the valley who would like to see us go out of business. And that's just the nature of how you wake up. And you know that there are people all over the world that would like to take you out of business. So a little different level of severity, but similar thinking. And so it's incumbent upon us to actually wake up every day and think about the innovation that we can deliver. And I think the biggest things that we all have to keep in mind are that you can never get religious about what worked for you last week. You can never be worried or focus on a change that's coming your way that doesn't feel comfortable. Because if it's coming, it's coming. And then you have to figure out, how do I, to some extent, disrupt myself before someone else does? And I think that, I think that's an incredible set of attributes that you all have exhibited, and that companies that actually have lasting staying power in Silicon Valley have also exhibited.
That's great. So that's fascinating, because General, you just got about a $700 billion tab that you get to go buy drinks.
I wouldn't put it quite that way, but
Well, all right.
yes, we did.
You just know where my mind is once we get through the next 20 minutes.
We'll get you a cocktail if you need one.
But you've got to take that $700 billion and you are fighting wars today. You're still fighting in Afghanistan, you're fighting in Syria, you are fighting unconventional enemies across the globe, you're fighting in cyberspace, but you've also got to prepare for the future. Now the strategy is really clear about, to some extent, modernizing that force, looking forward to the future, to those near peer and potentially peer competitors. How do you balance that? How are you going to balance that $700 billion tab between today's needs, which are real, and maintenance and people and healthcare, with all those future needs that you know your successor and your successor's successors are going to need you to do well?
So there's a great way that Eisenhower thought about that. And he said, it's not enough to attend to the forces of today, we have to plan for the forces we will need in the future. That's a rough paraphrase of what he said. And we find ourselves in that place, balancing the fight we have right now on our hands, which consumes a substantial amount of the resources that are available. And parsing out of that allotment of resources that have been generously given, those funds and resources that are required to attend to the technologies of the future. And again, you heard a few of them in General Schwartz's opening comments. Hypersonics change the battlefield. Artificial intelligence changes the way that we look at data and the way we look at intelligence derived from sensors in the battle space. Decision tools that derive from that artificial intelligence speed our ability to make decisions. All of those things must be delivered, in addition to the things that keep us strong today. And so just to put a fine point on hypersonics, it's not just that a hypersonic warhead goes fast. It's that a hypersonic warhead that enters the Hudson Bay can strike any point in the continental United States. Think about that for a minute. The same is true if our adversaries face our capability to deploy those kinds of tools. Speed's not enough for the weapon itself. You actually have to be able to connect it to data systems that empower decisions that literally outsmart the enemy. And so that dynamic is going to have to play out over the next several years, and we have to attend to that, because if we don't, we're not paying attention to the admonition of Dwight Eisenhower, which is being strong today is just not enough. And so we're going to have to balance. The balance is what we challenge ourselves to do every year when we build our budget for the following year. Here's my prediction for all of you. $700 billion is the appetite of the nation for defense. That was a very heavy political lift. And we shouldn't sit on our laurels and think that next year and the year after that there will be more. So not only are we going to have to figure out how to balance the investment, we're going to have to find efficiencies inside the department that carve out that money that's available for us to attend to the future.
Chuck, you've got one luxury. Congress doesn't approve your budget.
Good point.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if you could imagine how your business would be negatively affected today if you didn't know how much money you had to spend next year or the year after or the year after. How would that affect your ability to manage today and plan for tomorrow's new capabilities?
That wasn't on the list of questions we
Nope,
agreed to.
not even close. Martha didn't give me anything. She just said, show up. She's in Iowa.
I'll tell you, she's in Iowa. I think look, it would be a completely different world. The pressure we have is that we operate under a 90-day operating environment at a time where we say we manage for the long term. And there are lots of competing advice out there. Everybody has great advice for us running publicly traded companies. You should just ignore the short term. You should only manage for the long term. And then there's these activist investors that come in and create havoc in your life if you don't. So the issue is you always have to do both. And you always have to be committed to doing both. And so I think the dynamic that you have to operate under an assumption that there's some sort of lower limit that you have to deal with, and I'm assuming that you guys assume there's something there that you're gonna operate within. I think the thing that I would highlight is, as General Selva talked about the need to balance both the way you fight today and the way you're going to have to adapt to the future, is very similar to how we think about our business. We have to actually invest in the things that are paying for the business today. So investing in all of our core technologies and all the things that we need to do, but then making bets on new technology areas for the future. And we actually, to some extent, had a little bit of the opposite problem. We started investing in too many other areas, perhaps at the expense of the core for some period of time, and we had to come back and make sure we shored up our core, which actually gives us the ability now to invest in these other new areas. So it's a bit it's a bit of a different issue than you guys probably faced. But then as I think about what you described in a $700 billion budget, one of the fundamental reasons that we should be working more closely together is think about if the technology community or the business community can somehow help you find 5% productivity. That's $35 billion.
It's not a bad day.
And that's how we run our business. We're looking for 5 to 6 to 7% productivity every year. And so I think that's the opportunity, and that's the reason we should be working more closely together. As it relates to having Congress approve my budget, I'm glad they don't.
I'm just imagining reaching into your pocket at the end of the day and pulling out that $35 billion bill and going, that was pretty good.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me read you some quick numbers here. I want to focus on China for a minute because it's a significant issue for both of you, and some, again, related but different ways. This year, 570,000 STEM-educated professionals in the US, 4.7 million STEM-educated individuals out of China. In 1998, the US produced 3 million college grads and China 1 million. This year, US 3 million, China 8 million. This past year, the US had 600,000 patents filed, China 1.3 million. By the way, US, South Korea, Japan, and Western Europe had fewer than China combined. R&D in the US in 2010, $400 billion, China $200 billion. This year, $400 billion US, $475 billion in China. So we could probably pull out a lot of other numbers, but core to the US strength, commercially and militarily, has always been this engine of innovation. Is that era over? Do we face a new set of challenges? And linked to that, how do we view Chinese foreign direct investment and other countries' investment in emerging technologies in the US and around the globe?
It's about 6 questions in
That
one.
was,
Yes, it is.
that's pretty simple.
Pick any one of them.
So I'd like to start any conversation about China with there are 1.5 billion of them, and there are 319 million of us. So the fact that there are 5 times more college graduates and 5 times more PhDs and 5 times more smart people shouldn't be rocket science, right? 319 million, 1.5 billion. For nearly 5,000 years of human history, China was the #1 economic engine in the world, and they failed to industrialize. And 40 years later, after they industrialized, they failed to take full advantage of the information economy that emerged in this country in the early 1990s and into the early 2000s. They're just now figuring it out. Now they are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into fundamental research and investment in both military and commercial technologies in an attempt to be the #1 economy in the world by the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. All that is true. All the numbers you said are true. And about every 300 years, the Chinese system of governance implodes on itself. It is not a perfect system. It is a centrally controlled economy that doesn't respond to the demands of those 1.5 billion people. And that, to my way of thinking, is the key difference between the innovation engine in the United States and the forced innovation engine in China. Our citizens think up the new ideas. We go after education. We have some of the best educational institutions in the world. If that weren't true, the Chinese wouldn't come here to get educated. So here's the challenge for all of us. How do we motivate our young men and women to take on those hardcore science, math, and technology degrees that will allow us to continue to innovate? I have huge confidence. You're going to meet a couple of airmen tonight that if they don't give you confidence, you don't have a pulse. Our young men and women in and out of uniform are taught from the very early days of their education that inventing new things is cool. That hasn't been true in China for 100 years, and it's probably not going to be true in China for another dozen or so. But being ahead is not a birthright. If we don't motivate our young men and women, our high school age and mid-school age children to think about science and technology, it'll be too late. Having a business degree is just not going to be enough. We're going to have hardcore science to foster the innovation we're going to need to stay ahead. And it'll be just a marginal advantage because they do outnumber us 5-1.
Chuck, you face some challenges there too. There's that little company called Huawei.
I've heard of
How
them.
do you see this?
You know, look, I think that, look, China's moving in a much different direction than they have been. And while I agree with everything that General Selva said, I think it's a different China than we've seen for the last 50 years. And in our business, we believe that nothing makes us better than good competition. And the thing you have to think about with China is they don't compete on the same terms that we do. They don't think about markets the way we think about them. They don't think about things in the time frame we think about them. They think much longer term than we do, typically. Mm-hmm. And the other point I would make is that and I'm not a historian, but I think when you look at history, when countries have gone through major transformation, they have had an element of benevolent dictatorship that's actually helped make that transition. And I think you're seeing a bit of that with Xi Jinping and what he's doing there. And so I think they do recognize what's going to be important in the future, and they are investing heavily to actually get there. All that being said, I think a few things. Number one, the point of us educating their students and sending them home to compete with us is within our control. Our immigration policies are atrocious as it relates to foreign students who come here. We educate them and then we send them home because we won't allow them to stay, and they go compete with us. And then we talk about the competitive nature of these countries around the world. If we're going to educate these students, maybe we should have them stay here and work for us. The second thing that I think is incredibly important for the global economy is, look, I get the transactional things that are going on right now that we need to resolve. We need to get to the point where there's fair trade, all those kinds of things. But the world is better. The world will be better if China and the US are actually operating in harmony. Right? Well, there's going to be competition, but the world will be better off if we are working together. And I think that you'll go through these short-term issues. We'll deal with some of these tactical things that we're facing right now as two countries. But we have to get through them, and we have to find a way to get to, a global economy that actually is actually growing as a result of the two countries working more closely together. The other thing we have to do is, in this country, I think we have to deal with the immigration situation. We have to lead in security. We have to. If we believe what we could see, which is that the Internet of Things could add $7 or $8 trillion to this economy in 10 years, we have to solve cybersecurity. And we're in a unique position to actually do that in this country. That's the second thing. And the third thing is we have to make sure that we solve this privacy issue in a way that works. It's got to work for the citizens, it's got to work for innovation, and it's got to work for what you're trying to accomplish every day in protecting us. And I think those are three of the big things that we have to get right to win this thing long term.
Great. All right, fantastic. Let me ask you guys to look forward a little bit. But before we look forward, I'm going to remind you of looking back. You entered the Air Force in 1980, General? So in 1980, the Columbia took its first launch to Space Shuttle, and IBM PCs came out. So here we are 38 years later. I want you to think about, in a second, before I go to Chuck, I want you to think about what 38 years from now, the next vice chairman is sitting up here, what's his world of technology look like? And what's he looking forward to? And Chuck, for you, I think you graduated from college in 1987, right? It's the year of the Mac II. And one of the worst inventions ever PowerPoint. Insane question for you. When that CEO of Cisco is sitting up here in 30 years, what's the world look like to he or she, and what are they looking forward to in technology?
That is a fascinating question. So, in 1980, when I graduated from the academy, I wouldn't have thought the internet would be as pervasive as it is. I'm a traditionalist. I still have an AOL email address because I don't know what's coming next, and I just don't want to change.
You and Steve Case are the last two.
But that harkens back to the first set of networked computers I worked on was as a young squadron commander. I stood up a squadron, and we were in 18 double-wide trailers while we were waiting for our buildings to be built. And one of our young airmen said, you know, all these computers that we have, we can actually hook them together and be more effective than any of the other 5 flying squadrons on base. And I said, great idea. We don't have the money for it. And that was a Friday afternoon, and Monday when I showed up to work, there were these goofy cables between all the double-wide trailers. And he had spent his weekend networking the squadron. And it multiplied our output almost overnight. We built schedules collaboratively. We did tasks, administrative and operational, collaboratively. We managed our supply accounts, all our finance accounts on that little local area network that was built in a weekend. And so as I look forward into the future, it's that airman. It's that young soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine somewhere that's going to take the basic technology and flip his or her unit on its head. And so I really can't predict what the technology looks like, but the thing I am profoundly confident of is that the young men and women who choose to wear this uniform and choose to partner with great partners in industry like Chuck and all of the people in this room, they will figure out how to take that technology and change the way we operate. And that is the secret sauce that I think represents who we are as Americans, who we are as leaders, both in business and in the military, that we place value on that person's labor, on that young man or woman who comes up with an idea that can turn the organization around literally overnight. And we have to be confident that what they're thinking about is going to help us be better in the future.
So what technology will we be talking about 38 years from now? I have absolutely no idea. I mean, think about it. If you go back 38 years and try to foreshadow what we're dealing with today, no one, perhaps one person would have been right and they would have been lucky. But I think there's a couple things that are going on right now that it's important for us to understand the reality of what I believe will happen in the future. So there's this incredible concern over automation, artificial intelligence. The opportunities are immense, and the implications in the near term can be difficult. There's going to be job dislocation from a lot of the technology and the automation that exists out there, and I believe that it is absolutely incumbent on the business community to take an active role in ensuring that we're actually helping educate those people who are dislocated by the very technology that we bring to market for the new jobs, for the next jobs, for some sort of job. But I think long term, when you look at what's going to happen is the human is not going to disappear in this equation. And I look at some technology we have today, which is this collaboration technology that we have in our portfolio. And yeah, it allows you to have electronic meetings. It allows you to share thoughts in real time around the world. It allows you to do all these interesting things. But lately, we've been looking at the core representation of human interaction across all those technologies. And I find this incredibly interesting that when I talk to my fellow CEOs, they do not care about the technology. But as soon as I start talking about the fact that we're understanding more about what the technology can tell us about the value of human interaction, that's what they care about. And that's what I believe is going to be different than what we think is going to happen, is that the technology is actually going to allow all of us as humans to actually do greater things than we do today. And 20 years from now, it's not going to be a net negative. It's actually going to enable us to actually solve the problems that exist in the world, solve water issues around the world, solve hunger issues around the world. And that's what I'm so optimistic about, is that this technology will allow us to solve the biggest problems this planet's ever faced.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot imagine two better individuals and institutions to represent BENS. Please congratulate once again.